Hello, this is Mark Tooley, president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy here in Washington, D.C., with the pleasure today of talking to Bill Reddinger at Regent University in Virginia Beach about his new book, Political Thinkers for Our Time, focusing on some great voices from the best of our political tradition, including Burke, Washington, Lincoln, Hayek, although I'm not sure if he fits into the our specific political tradition, and Martin Luther King, among others. So commend it to you. Bill, thank you for joining us and tell us why you wrote this book.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Mark. The first reason I started out writing this book is number one, it's simply an extension of my teaching, and so in the classroom, one of the things that I attempt to do as a university professor is try to be as clear as I can be for students, and to challenge them to think clearly so that they might speak clearly. So my intention here at the beginning of the project was really to try to write an, an accessible introduction to important thinkers in the Anglo-American political tradition in such a way that college students and general readers coming to these thinkers for the first time could really uh, be people who are wrestling with the ideas that these thinkers present in a way that is helpful to them. Uh, as as often happens in any given writing project, occasionally in the process, some additional purposes, kind of emerge organically from the process. So one of the things that I found myself realizing as I'm going through the process of writing the book is that, in a sense, many of the things which were part of the air that we breathe in the United States of America for a long time that I'm addressing in this book, things like liberty or economic freedom and so on, these are no longer taken for granted in the same way. Not only among people who would be um, somewhat critical of some of the features of American constitutionalism for a long time, but people who come from political camps that that are very self-consciously pro-America, but seem to disagree with a lot of these principles that I address in the book.
So in that sense, the book is very timely, very needed, and responding to the need to make basic arguments that were not needed 20 years ago, that perhaps were part of our consensus, but now are contested. Uh, Assumptions about limited government, about
Sure.
quote unquote liberalism, about the free market, et cetera.
Right. No, that's right. So in the book, one of the things you'll find very quickly is that each chapter introduces some political concept as represented by one of its greatest exponents. And so you named some of those names at the beginning of our discussion here. But the book has a chapter on Edmund Burke, for example, and his understanding of ordered liberty. Uh, there's a chapter on Tocqueville and his treatment of equality. And but even things like, say, religious liberty, which once was very much a kind of bipartisan consensus issue in America. I try to explain this through an exposition of Washington's famous letters to the different congregations at the beginning of the Republic. Um, but even something like the nature of Republican self-government, it seems to me, needs defending now. Uh, and so I try to do that through an exposition of the political thought and statesmanship of Abraham Lincoln. And so throughout, I'm hoping that what I'm doing here is, in some respects, to state the obvious. At least what was for many of us for a very long time kind of obvious, but which appears not to be quite as obvious anymore in quite the same way.
So our traditions, historic views on religious freedom, on limited government, on equal justice for all, they are now contested by both sides of the political spectrum. Why have we reached this moment when these supposedly settled issues are back on the table?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that that it's obviously complicated question. One of the things that we've seen, I think, is that there has been an ideological or an intellectual effect. People who are influential authors undoubtedly have changed the conversation. One of the things which has happened clearly in the American political scene, the Western European political scene in the past couple of decades, is that I think we've seen in some cases um, real grievances from patriotic Americans, from patriotic citizens in other countries. But some of the remedies that have been offered, either intellectually or politically, are things which have moved away from this Anglo-American political heritage that we have. But the assumption in my book, I would suggest, is that people have moved away from this tradition in some cases, it would seem, without actually knowing what they're abandoning. And so, whether it's some basic arguments for the free market, as seen in Hayek and Roke in the book, or whether it's arguments for religious liberty, these are things which I think we can tell from some of the rhetoric that we hear and some of the writing that is out there. These are things which are being fundamentally questioned without perhaps fully understanding exactly what it is that's being jettisoned.
Widely questioned on both sides of the political spectrum and I guess the thought leader class, but do you find these issues coming up among your students?
Sure. Well, I teach at a university. It's a Christian university, and certainly culturally, but also politically, it leans right of center, and it has since I've been where I am for the last 15 or so years. And it is kind of interesting to see uh, the tenor of student assumptions change over the years. But it is definitely the case that there are things that are being fundamentally questioned in a way that uh, it's not that it was rare before, but it simply didn't happen before. And so there is definitely a real willingness to question things, and I think that's good. Certainly, that's what you're supposed to be doing, of course, as a college student. To be questioning things though that are really quite politically fundamental, and it's my hope that at the very least there can be kind of an intelligent engagement with some of the ideas that young students are doubting in a fundamental way.
Did you write this book chiefly with your students in mind or for older audiences?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think it is the case that I started writing particularly for students. In subsequent drafts of the manuscript, I went back and kind of adjusted the framing at the beginning or end of this or that chapter, specifically because of um, more, I guess, more a broader audience, perhaps, who might be interested in coming to some of these issues. So, it's I would just submit that it is probably the case that many intelligent students, your typical college age students, are asking very good questions, and I think they have good reason to ask fundamental questions about our political order. But I think in many cases, they're really just not able to think through some of the implications of what they're saying or thinking. So they just need some resources, it seems to me, to kind of help them out.
If I could go through some of the names you cover, what does Edmund Burke say to us today that remains relevant and alive?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, in anyone who's studied Burke, they will know that Burke is the father of modern traditional conservatism. He is the exemplar of opposition to revolutionary chaos in the French Revolution. And in contrast with the French Revolution and the insane Socrates of the French Assembly, as he called Rousseau, This idea that people are born naturally good and they're only corrupted by society, well, he certainly rejects that view. And instead, he favors a kind of conservative localism that we might call it today. And according to this view, people are simply not born with a pure native goodness, and certainly not a native fitness for involvement in society. Instead, they need to be cultivated by local entities, local social bodies, certainly the family, but local community, friends, religious organizations. And I mean, this might be one of the things that Burke can do for us is that when we see a kind of Rousseauian perspective, which is more commonly assumed on the political left. Burke clearly provides a kind of intellectual response to this. But it's also the case that he's, I think, providing a kind of response, which I don't really emphasize in this chapter on Burke, but he provides a kind of response, it seems to me, to certain versions of national conservatism, which downplay this local element. And so, for Burke, the assumption is that while it is obviously the case that the largest political order of which we are a part is deeply important, and it's part of how we should live together. It's really in local community where real life happens, in a sense. And so, if we are to seek change, well, of course, we seek policy change at the level of Parliament for Burke. But it's also there's a need to provide ultimate policy change in much more local levels, to act as a human being, both politically and in your civic organizations and in your family, to cultivate good people. Right? It's not only a national kind of conversation that needs to be had. So I think Burke is helpful in that way as well, just as Tocqueville is, whom I address in the next chapter.
And what does Tocqueville say to us today that is especially relevant?
Sure. Well, one of the things that, again, if I can, maybe talk to an audience who has studied Tocqueville in college or still enjoy reading Tocqueville sometimes, he's famous in part for this thesis that modern democratic life it's dominated by a passion for equality. And so the neutral fact of modern democratic life is relative equality of conditions, relative to previous eras in human history. And out of that fact comes this desire for equality. And if Tocqueville is right, people love equality so much that they may well prefer it to liberty. And that's the danger that he sees and wants to avoid through localism and other sorts of solutions. Now, in some respects, it is that in itself that Tocqueville can help us with. It's a very difficult thing, it seems to me, in some respects, to teach Tocqueville, because really once you get to the end of democracy in America, you've kind of worked your mind over on this way of looking at society, and it seems to explain so much here and there, whether it's the way family relations are in modern democratic life, or politics, or religion. I'll just say this. Here's something I don't address in the book, but I wondered about a little bit in the last year or so. When I've read Tocqueville more recently, I have wondered if there is some sense in which the world in which he is describing is itself perhaps changing a little bit. Just an open question. But, the beginning of his Democracy in America has this famous statement that he's written this book for a world altogether new. We need a new political science for a world altogether new, by which he meant democratic, not aristocratic. And some of the ways in which he describes aristocratic sensibilities, it seems to me that we're seeing a little bit more of that now, even if not from an aristocratic source as such. And so that, it seems to me, has all kinds of consequences if there's anything to that. But
What's an example of an aristocratic tendency in contemporary society?
Sure. Well, I mean, the if I can back up to a democratic example, Tocqueville has these observations that when you live in democratic society, there's a tendency to centralize everything. That's the natural drift of democracy, is centralization, because the natural drift is political uniformity. If we are all equal, if we're all the same, it only seems right that we would pass laws all the same for everyone, regardless of any kind of federal system. When people look at other people, they see people. Whereas, what's an aristocrat? Well, an aristocrat is someone who obviously looks at someone from another class and sees a person, but in a sense, it takes an effort of the mind to feel empathy for someone of a different class. It's almost as if we're not the same species if we're in a different class. And so there's the danger, if you will, of democratic life. It appears to be as a danger of utter universal uniformity. And a danger of aristocracy is to kind of cut us up into different groups and to claim that we are not able to communicate outside of our groups in a kind of aristocratic way. We tend to have less empathy for people who are not part of our initial group, appears to be the implication. And so, some of the discussions that we might see about issues of immigration policy, it seems to me, could veer into one of two ditches, one of which would be a kind of careless moralism that is unreflective, makes no distinction between different sorts of people, and another might be to really not address other people from other countries with the kind of human charity that we ought to. So that might be one example.
And Abraham Lincoln's message for today?
Sure. One of the things that, there's a lot going on in that chapter on Lincoln, but I would say that the one thing which I find to be very powerful in Lincoln, for anyone who's never read some of his less famous speeches, is his what is effectively natural law argumentation for human equality. And so in some of his more philosophic speeches, parts of his Peoria speech, parts of his later New Haven speech, he's making very powerful arguments about the equality of human beings that everyone already knows and therefore doesn't really need to be told. As such, slavery is therefore immoral. We are in a time when it seems that there are some folks on both the left and some folks on the right who have the view that the American Republic really belongs to people of one race. And this might be more fringe views, but some of us perhaps see it a little bit more commonly than we might like. And so, on the a kind of 1619 project view might suggest that America really belongs to white people, and that's a bad thing. Whereas there are some who would say America really belongs to white people, and that's a good thing. Just to kind of state it in a rather blunt way. And so Lincoln makes very persuasive arguments, both philosophically and historically, about why that is simply not true. And so America is a place where we see through the prism of the Declaration that really, in potential, belongs to any human being who might become a citizen. So some very powerful speeches in Lincoln that I try to summarize in that chapter.
And so all of your featured thinkers are part of our Anglo-American political tradition, although Hayek is speaking from outside. I suppose Tocqueville is speaking from outside, etc. Would you describe all of them as classically liberal?
Well, the short answer is yes. So, when I suppose I could have done a better job in the introduction of describing a few features of the Anglo-American political tradition. But in a sense, I'm viewing that tradition, as Hayek did, which is to say more of an intellectual tradition, which sometimes has French or German or other elements. And so it's less about some sort of ethnic or geographical idea. But yeah, I would say that in certain respects, they're all classical liberals. I mean, Ropke, who is, I'm sure the least well known of the authors that I address in the book, Ropke is a German, and I would say that he was a liberal, although it's more accurate to say that he would be an ordo liberal. This school of thought which emphasizes the importance of the whole ordo, the whole of society. So if you want to think about economics responsibly, it's best if you think about society as a whole and all the moral features of society that make free enterprise possible. In some philosophic sense, I think Ropke probably would not call himself a liberal, but undoubtedly he would in some other sense of that word. So it kind of depends upon how we're defining the term.
Bill Reddinger, author of Political Thinkers for Our Time. Thank you, sir, very much for an informative conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.